So I'm here to talk to you today about leaps of faith, because to me, there's a lot of different definitions of entrepreneurship, and some people define entrepreneurship as, ADD or bipolar or manic disorder. I tend to call it ATB, or addicted to BlackBerry. So there's a lot of different ways you can define entrepreneurship, but what I've found more than anything else is that entrepreneurship is kind of like a religion, and if you aren't in the religion, you really just don't understand it. And so when people ask you what it means to be an entrepreneur, or what it's going to be oh, look at that, right in front of me. Leaps of faith, blind faith, that's the other thing I'm going to talk to you about today. What does it mean to be an entrepreneur? You have to kind of take this leap of faith, and the first time you do it is going to be something that's obviously new and different and exciting. So the first step is coming to something like this and in being involved with an amazing organization like Alchemy and like EO. All right, so let's start with a little story. I'm not going to give you a bunch of platitudes today, maybe 2 or 3. I'm just going to give you my own story, which is, as Reza said, has had its fair share of successes, but has also had its fair share of failures. And that's a theme that I think we've heard a lot about today, is not just how do you succeed, but when you fall down, when you fail, how fast you get back up. So this is me. I don't know how old I am, but and I don't know what happened to this kid in the photo, but needless to say, I was actually a pretty nerdy, confused kid growing up, and I'm still consider myself a nerd. I was the son of Burmese immigrants, born in Miami, Florida, raised in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and then moved to Madison, Wisconsin. Of all places in the world, why my parents decided it was a good idea to move to Madison, Wisconsin, I have no idea. We were the only Burmese people for probably like the whole country, about 2,000 miles. And so I grew up the son of these immigrants, and like we've talked about today, we teach our kids that it's a good idea to be lawyers, it's a good idea to be doctors, and both my parents are doctors, my aunts and uncles are doctors, my cousins are doctors, my entire family is doctors. That's the only way that they were able to get out of Burma. And I knew I didn't want to be a doctor by the time I got to high school. I had tremendous opportunities to do all sorts of cool shit. I had trained dolphins in Hawaii. I'd followed wild dolphins. I'd worked in a neuroscience lab since 5th grade, and I'd done all this crazy stuff related to do with science. And I remember my senior year of high school, I was working in this lab where we were working with frog eggs and trying to figure out like how proteins folded. And I just decided it was the most boring shit possible, and I did not want to be involved with that anymore. Not to say that that's not important. Sorry for all the doctors and scientists in the room that doing very, very good work. So I went to what I thought was the biggest opportunity in the world, which I think it still is, which I think education is a fundamental tenet for our youth and for our kids, and I'll talk about that in a second. I'd known I'd wanted to go to Stanford since I was 12 years old. Played volleyball, and Stanford had just won the national championship, and I was so excited to go on there and walk on the team. And I rode a lot of pine, and meaning I basically sat on the bench. And that was my first year of college. I knew I didn't want to be a doctor. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I just ran around and basically almost failed out of Stanford my first year. And I remember sitting there, this was in the middle of the dot-com boom, and I remember sitting there and reading this article. It was this Wall Street Journal article, and we had just got done with our workout, and we're sitting there at the frat house and whatever, and really, there's another confusing factor. And confusion is a common theme that we're going to come back to. And there was this article about a kid that is selling WWF figurines on the internet, and he was making like $400,000 a week. And I said to myself, what the hell am I doing here? Why am I not taking advantage of this huge opportunity to go out and be an entrepreneur? But I didn't know what an entrepreneur was, right? I just thought it was something that was fun and cool. I played with computers my whole life, and so it was something that I knew and that I understood. I understood technology, although one lesson, never try and hack into the NASA Mission Control Center. I did that when I was 11. All of a sudden, this big warning comes up that says, stop, you are on the federal government property you will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And I remember running over to the computer and ripping it out of the wall and just leaving it in the lab. And I sat there just kind of shivering for a good, I don't even know how many minutes, and then for a couple of days after, hoping I would never get caught. But I had read a couple of good hacker books and routed myself for it. Anyways, point being, I'd been a hacker my whole life. And so, here I was at this fantastic institution, the ivory tower, right? All the books and academia you could possibly ever think of. And I said, all right, screw it, I'm out. And I remember going home to my parents' house, Thanksgiving of my sophomore year in college, and I said, I'm dropping out of school. I'm going to start a company. And they were like, what are you talking about? Are you out of your fucking mind? And, well, they're Asian parents, so they don't really say it like that, but that was my interpretation of how they would say it. It was a little bit nicer than that. Surprisingly enough, they said, okay, great, well, you go ahead and do that, but, all of this money that we save for your tuition and all this other stuff, that's going to go away and sit in a corner, and if you're going to do this, you're on your own. And I said, okay, great. I didn't know what that meant. And I remember I got my first Amex card, and it was a gold Amex. And why they would think it was a good idea to give a 18-year-old kid a gold Amex corporate card, I have no idea. And I started my first company on that. And I didn't know you had to pay it off a month later at the time. And so, literally there's $600,000, I think, of charges and servers and payroll and other stuff that I'd run through this thing. But I started my first company. And it was a company called Utel Retail, which is, now that I look back on it, kind of like one of the worst names I've ever heard in my entire life. And we followed that up by a company called Get Inventory, which was also one of the worst names I've heard of in my entire life. And it was the biggest, most exciting ride I'd been on up until that point in time. We were building search engines, we were building supply chain software, we were building consumer electronics integration. It was fantastic. And then the stock market crashed and whoomph, right? Getting your hands dirty and all this stuff, and talk about getting your hands dirty. This was something where literally I felt like my entire world was crashing down. And I went literally gray, I think, at the time. It was 1920. And I thought I'd never again be able to be an entrepreneur. I'd never be able to start another company. And this was after raising $2 million in my first meeting. First meeting I ever walked into. I had literally a napkin with the business plan, and the old thing worked. And I'd go to Bucks in Woodside, which was like the mecca for entrepreneurship at the time. And I tell you what, getting your hands dirty felt good, but it wasn't exactly what it was all knocked up to be. So that was me. So I jumping in against all advice, going in and getting all of this stuff was an experience that I'll always treasure, and I'll always remember as something that taught me how to actually work through the problems, right? I had started this company against the advice of my parents. I started this company against the advice of my friends, against everyone that I basically knew. I had all these investors, on the other hand, that were talking to me about how amazing it was to be an entrepreneur, and I was going back basically as a failure, right? And so I did kind of what I knew how to do best, which was just to kind of go back and insert myself into school, and somehow talk my way into going straight into Stanford Business School out of undergrad, and continued to be an entrepreneur, but kind of did it from the sidelines, and was working at one of the early social networking companies, and really wasn't something that I knew that I was like, okay, I'm ready to go do this and get back on my feet and have the confidence, which I think every one of us as an entrepreneur needs to go out and really make this happen. So there I was at the end of business school, and I was literally trying to decide what to do with my life. What happens? What do I do now? Here I am, this freshly minted MBA, and like we've heard from before, MBA was really just a fancy term to get people to do sales, and that's what business development turned into, right? Was a fancy term to get MBAs to do sales. And I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I was really clueless. I remember graduating from business school, and I was 23 at the time, and my mom comes up and she gives me this big hug and she says, "Son, it's not too late to go back to medical school." And I said, "Oh shit, what am I gonna do?" And that's when I dived into, the company that I started in 2004 and have really been driving ever since, and which has gotten me to this amazing place in life today. And so I'll tell you a little story about it, and then a couple of life lessons, and then we'll end this thing. And again, hopefully the message that you take away from here is that you have to continue to take that leap of faith. You're going to fall down. It's how fast you get back up is what makes it so successful. Or what makes you so successful. So 4Info is a company that I started right out of business school. And it was a time when, if you remember, if you had a Verizon phone and you had a Sprint phone, the phones couldn't even text. There were literally 2.5 million text messages sent a month. That number went to 2.5 billion in June of 2004. So we were starting this company at the time to take advantage of this huge phenomenon and trend, cell phones. We heard from the South African gentleman today of this, this thing that had just emerged as this powerful device that everyone had. And we built ourselves up to be, 4Info was the king of SMS. That's what we were titled. And still today, we send out 1/4 of all the text messages in the country. And then this damn thing came along and screwed it all up. And, obviously a visionary, but we really had to learn how to pivot as a company. There was a period of time in 2008 where we got lucky. I mean, we raised $20 million in August of 2008, about a month before the apocalypse happened. And that was something that, I'll look back on as, again, it's one of those things where it's not always, hard work is a huge component of everything we do as being entrepreneurs, but luck is also a big component of what plays into it. And along the way, had to really learn how to pivot. And that's another thing that I'd like you guys to try and think about taking away. Nobody, even Steve Jobs, ever gets it right on the first opportunity or ever gets it right on the first time. And your challenge as an entrepreneur is to learn how to pivot and to turn and to make course corrections as quickly as possible. We have this methodology at 4Info now where once a quarter we basically put 5 new ideas on a whiteboard. And the challenge isn't figuring out how to get those 5 things to work and expand our business. And now, we power not only 90 million SMS users a month, but we also reach 90 million iPhone and BlackBerry and Android users a month on apps and display. So we're running the mobile web and SMS at this point. But the challenge is to learn how to kill things, because there's plenty of ideas, there's plenty of opportunity. It's all about execution. All right, so that brings me to my last point, which is raise your hand now, not later. And to me, this is an important component of entrepreneurship that I think has been missing a little bit as we've, even in talking amongst us, at this amazing conference today. And it's something that I'm personally very, very passionate about. And so my idol, when kind of thinking about this, I remember getting interviewed for this fellowship back in 2000-something, and they asked me who my idol was, and I said Bill Gates. And I thought about it afterwards, and I was like, wow, that was a really nerdy thing to say. But it was true. And Bill Gates at the time, this was even before he had become a huge philanthropist, had obviously created this huge company and is just starting to really bring out what the Gates Foundation was. And when I look back on that today, what I realize is that, that's still true. He's still definitely my idol. But one of the only downside that I have on it is that Bill Gates waited till he got done with what he was doing at Microsoft to be able to give back and actually make a change and make a difference in the community. And so people see this, right, and they see it as a brick wall. They see it as, okay, I can't go this way as an entrepreneur, so I'm going to course correct and go the other way. And they also see this when they think about the link between the for-profit world and the nonprofit world. They say, okay, well, I got to focus on doing one thing really well, and which is right and which is important, before I have the opportunity to actually change and give back. And so I'm here to tell you today that that's not true, right? Everyone here has the opportunity to actually make a difference, has the opportunity to go sit on a nonprofit board. The CEO of After School All-Stars, Ben Paul, sitting here back in the room, that was one of the first nonprofits that I joined the board of. And I never really understood as an entrepreneur what a difference it could make to come back and work with such an amazing organization started by Governor Schwarzenegger that serves 85,000 kids a day after school. To me, it was like, well, if I don't have billions and billions of dollars at the time, then what's the point of working with nonprofits? Because it's all about financing and it's all about fundraising. That's not the case. And so what I would encourage all of you to do is not just think about how you can be an entrepreneur and how you can build your company, but also how can you also give back at the same time? How can you change the definition of how other leaders give back? How can you influence the folks around you and say, look, this isn't, I'm going to build my company, I'm going to make a shitload of money, but at the same time, I'm going to have the opportunity to actually work with kids, work with education, work with whatever you're passionate of, and give back. And so what I would encourage you to do is look at the world not as a brick wall, but as an open door. I'd encourage you to continue your work with organizations like EO. Take a look at my nonprofit, which is Palindrome Advisors, which is designed to take people like you, people like us, and connect them with nonprofits and tons of other volunteer organizations out there. So in closing, I'll just say, make the leap of faith. Right? Leaps of faith are something that as entrepreneurs that we have to do every single day. Sometimes we have good days, sometimes we have bad days, but you've got the power within you to make that successful leap of faith. All right. Thank you very much. Have a great day.